thank you, all of you from Astha who have organized this beautiful conference. Um, it's really something, to meet a whole lot of people from so long back and people who we've been currently working with, as well as, lost touch in between. And yeah, it's something. It's something that I think I'll really value a lot as we go ahead from here. Um, well, to get back to what I'm supposed to be talking about, which is ecocentric process work. Um, I must say that this is the very first time I'm trying to present the whole thing together. I've done a lot of talking in bits and pieces of all of this as we've done the ecocentric process work over the last almost 8, 9 years. And even earlier, we've done some programs. But I'm somehow not quite satisfied with the way I'm going to be presenting after having written the paper. The reason is it's very, very difficult for me to present in a linear form, something which is been a live thing that we have been working with. But I guess that's something one has to live with. So maybe I will start with a little bit of my you know, acknowledgements regarding, how this work, as we worked along with it, with various participants, with various groups. It's not only the ideas and the thoughts and the frameworks and processes that were evolved. A whole lot of people who have worked with me, and many of them happen to be here. I should really thank them all very deeply for making this kind of work come alive in process work setting. So many of them are here: Rama, Farah, Ishita, Durga, so many, Samba, of course, and many others have been with me in this journey. And also, it's been a lot of nebulous things which one has lived through, which has contributed to, the way this work is unfolded. Um, First of all, as part of my personal journey, for me, it has been a lot of time spent with nature in early childhood. A lot of time walking in the hills, being with the wilderness, being alone with the wilderness. And something which, all the precious experiences from there, I think I never really shared much with people, even though one shares a lot in a process lab setting and so on. I guess it's largely because during those times it has been, everybody is so immersed in the man made world. And, it was only in books I found people who resonated with me, And it's not that I didn't resonate with other people for various other reasons, that was there. But this part of me didn't find much expression, except as I, journeyed alone and either reading or meeting, traveling and being in wilderness and so on. I think that's one major thing. What I got of it was not very clear for a very long time. And but that it was very important and precious was always there, more precious than a whole lot of other things. And as I grew up, it was more of gradually I found people talking more and more about, for instance, tigers going extinct and such things. So there was a whole lot of people talking a little bit about that. That was one step more. Later on, it was a whole in process work. I think when I first came into process work, I think Pulin, Indira, were the facilitators at that time. There was another kind of a great resonance. And much later, I realized that so much of the principles of nature, principles of ecology, are actually embedded in process work. A whole lot of it, not just one or two. It was not just, it so happens this is similar in this way or something. And I'll come to that a little later. Um, I think it was only when gradually there's more and more talk about ecological. No, there's one other thing. I think in the IIM, I really felt like a fish out of water because I just couldn't connect to, getting into corporate sector. And for the life of me, I couldn't figure out in all the case studies we were asked to put our objectives, and the done thing to do was to say maximizing profits for the stakeholders. I didn't know for the life of me why the hell should I spend my life maximizing profits for them. So I just didn't belong there, you know. And not that I didn't understand the meaningfulness of some having certain comforts and conveniences and people manufacturing them. All that was there, but I was not charged with much of that. So I never really worked in any corporate organization. But I think two, three things to thank for was one was meeting Pulin and entering into process work. And the other was, I think, a couple of books I read there. One was called Limits to Growth. It was put together by what is called a group of people called themselves the Club of Rome. And then there was books like Schumacher's Small is Beautiful and so on, which for the first time I came across things which questioned the existing paradigm. And yeah, it was there at the back of my mind as I continued to try and find things to make sense of what is happening in the world and so on. And not many people were on my trip, so to speak. So it was not so very easy, except here and there in books. And then I think it was closer to the end of the last century, which is gradually more and more talk about the ecological degradation happening in various ways was, being talked about in media in various ways. And then I think when climate change gave it an added impetus. I think one of the things is, Gautam spoke something about going against history. And, I think there was a bit of a turn of history in the sense of movement of ecological consciousness arising. Very early stages even now, but still it seemed to be there. I think that probably gave me the guts to go into it and find expression for some of the thoughts that were in me. In terms of process work, I think for me, Pulin, I remember him talking somewhere on the side, I don't think it was in any formal session, saying that if he had not called it process work, he would have called it contextology. So, to me, it seems very natural that the context in which we actually live is the earth, the largest context, sensible context, leave alone universe, etc. So the search was for integrating this context into the nature of the work. And I think it has been quite a interesting thing for me because things all fell into place in bits and pieces through actually working with people. The first thing was the Prakriya Green Wisdom School, where there's a whole lot of attempts made, we have made as a group to 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 embed certain ideas, certain consciousness of being part of the earth, being understanding and connecting with nature and nature's principles could find a lot of expression in a school setting. And then later on, it was also in Bhumi College, where we have two fellow programs, one on sustainable living and one on holistic education. While both of them, at one level are very much for people who are much more embedded in who may not be that much connected, but still feel a need to do something, be somewhere, work in either to uh, to kind of stop or work with ecological degradation in some way or sustainability in some way. Most people come in without any full clarity what to do, but there was a lot of need, very strong, you know mm, existential pull, you can say, to do something in this sphere. And that made the journey very rich, also during the last 8 years. And we started something called Sankalan. Sankalan means sort of coming together. And we brought together a whole range of thoughts, ideas, processes into this. And to make it, to make it a something that can be really actually valuable to the students who come in, to the fellows who come in. But also we do other programs where other people who are not fellows in Bhumi College also sort of come in. So I'll try to go through a few, what you call it, slides which talk about, first of all, why ecocentric. I've said a part of it, but let me go into it a little bit more. To talk more about this contextology thing, that we are nature. And it's not only the nature outside, but how we are nature. We are in many, many ways, as we'll see later, in so many little ways, the way we self-regulate, the alkalinity, the salinity, the in physical ways, as well as multiple ways we seem to be like the nature outside. We are not very different. And of course, we can't live more than a few minutes without nature. And in fact, I read somewhere that we don't live on Earth, we live in Earth. We live in the atmosphere. So it's really our anthropocentric kind of thinking which created language of this kind, which makes us say we live on Earth, almost like the Earth is a rock and we live on top of it. So to reconnect with nature, is something which I think people seem to value a lot or not. And there are also a few people who seem to be moving from one to the other. But experience is basic to this. Unless you've experienced a lot, not as a consumer or as a, going to a resort and having a good time, but really spending time communing with nature, being with nature. Maybe also connecting with other people who think about these things and so on. So this reconnecting with nature is something that becomes very, very essential, and more so in today's times when the climate change, etc., has become a topic that's every day being talked about in media and everywhere else. It's not something which we can afford to ignore anymore. And you have most of the thinkers on sustainability saying this whole thing is really not an issue of something out there. It's not about energy. It's not about water. It's not about, it's about human perception. So unless we look at human perception, we really can't get very far. So I'll go a little bit more into why this ecocentric process work. So one, as I mentioned, is a very strong anthropocentric orientation, which I can't go into more examples and why and wherefore of it, but there is a lot of work done on this, that, how this anthropocentric orientation has created various ecological crises. One of the kind of things that we can touch upon perhaps is how during the European Renaissance, there was this scientist philosopher called René Descartes, and he realized that the church was interfering too much with the work of the scientists. And so he apparently negotiated with the church to say that, okay, the church, you deal with matters of the spirit, leave the scientists to deal with matters of matter. You know, what about the day-to-day, the world of matter, not just leave it separated. So a lot of people have also worked and written about this, that this split between nature and spirit happened at least partly and largely because of the way science and technology and economics seem to unfold after that. No doubt a lot of anthropocentric uh, thinking would have happened even long, long back, maybe with agriculture, 10, 12,000 years back, when people could settle down in villages and civilization happened and more people had time for discoveries and inventions and so on and so forth. And all of that also might have given more and more, you know, to use Ashok's, what he mentioned, for instance, about the distinctiveness and the connection. I think human beings sought more distinctiveness for themselves, if I may say so. And the connection with nature was gradually lost. It was not so bad much before the European Renaissance, because people lived largely in rural areas, and there was a connect with the farm. There wasn't so much about the today it's being called the Anthropocene age. That age was not evident at that time. Human beings, many people still accepted that that nature was huge in their lives. They could not fight nature in many ways and so on. But this whole movement towards separating nature and spirit added a whole lot more to the split, which would have started much earlier. And in fact, I want to read for you one, or I could come to this later. Uh, this is some lines I found in an essay by one Jules Cashford. There were two different words for knowledge in Greek. Gnosis was knowledge won through relationship and love. The way you know a person, animal, plant, a garden, landscape, poem, story, or myth. It engages the whole personality, and it is in contrast to episteme, which was knowledge about something, a term which gives us epistemology. It is a way of knowing which engages primarily the rational mind. I think at some level we are all familiar with this. It's primarily a way of knowing which engages the rational mind. And later I will be talking a little bit about complexity and how human beings have not engaged progressively over time so much with the complexity of nature, or even complexity of our own bodies. And hence we have a whole lot in allopathic, our own selves. We make our, there is a human need to make things simple at one level and feel maybe distinctive, maybe good. Oh, I know it now. I know it, Whereas a lot of things we just don't know. And that maybe is difficult for human beings to say out loud, I don't know enough. But at most I can guess at, if these things happen, then this might emerge. So emergence is an important idea that is part of complexity and holistic thinking. And if you look at it in process work also, we talk a lot about working with emerging reality, So in that sense, there's a lot of recognition of complexity. Partly, I think Ashutosh also mentioned such things. Which is, okay, coming back to that, that is part of the connection between process work and complexity. But otherwise, if you look at it, we have treated nature also in a very epistemological way, and not with gnosis, not with love and caring and direct experience. And that's not been made easier by living in cities. So in cities, we don't even have the experience of, maybe we see a tree or two, but it's like mostly living in so many walls, and schools you study so many books, and the books are all about people's achievements of some kind or the other. And it's all epistemological knowledge in schools. Very little. By chance, if a teacher is very different, you get gnosis. I don't know, is Raghu here? He may tell me the Sanskrit. He doesn't seem to be here. Sanskrit meaning, maybe it's jnanam, is knowing in a deeper. Yeah, correct. Jnanam. Maybe it's the root is from India. Who knows? So jnanam maybe, but I couldn't figure out the word for epistemology. Maybe it's like vidya or buddhi. I don't know. What is it? Okay, whatever it is. Coming back, I feel epistemology is a little different. It's a little bit more dry, abstract thinking. A lot of somebody making a theory and then trying to apply it. You know, so somebody made a theory about this is what to do in school. You put all same class children in one class, and it's the most idiotic thing, as Gautam would tell. That he's worked a lot with mixed age group, and he's brought that to our school also. That it's such a simple thing. It doesn't occur to us. It's damn dumb to put same age group together. It's very artificial. It's unnatural. We don't learn that way. Nowhere else, people are same age group at the same place, etc. So we've done like that n number of things, which is taking somebody's conclusions and ideas. Maybe it was useful for industry. That's another story. I won't bring it here. All this kind of learning came from Manchester and so on. 10 minutes, okay, I'll try. So, yeah, so coming back, let's get back from epistemology to look at this, that as we said, we need to connect with ecology, we need ecological and humanizing values and not just ecological values, because there's also so much of a connect between, our inner self and the world and the earth around us. This is something just to, elaborate on this, like whether it is, a whole lot of work used to be done on studying animals or even human beings as separate beings. Now, apparently in 1925, this person, Alfred Lodka, had written a book where he talked about, it's not so much the organism or the species that evolves, but the entire system, species and environment. The two are inseparable. It was, even though, there are many people who say that, it's not entered our school books and our college books. It's still, many things are still learned as separate. So the split goes on and on everywhere. So similarly, the why ecocentric process work is we can really understand psyche only along with this context, which includes, not only whole person, family, community, but also the earth or nature. So this is just to relieve the monotony of my talking. I found this somewhere. So yeah, it's easier said than done, this kind of thing, because we are immersed in this man-made world. It's not very easy for us to be non-anthropocentric. But yet, what do I say? Like somewhere, the beginning of a new movement, million things need to be done. Maybe ecocentric process work is also one thing that can be done. And also, one simple thing is there. All of us as human beings, we tend to, and there's a lot of research on this, that we tend to do what others do around us. So the macro culture itself today is becoming one kind of standardized culture, and maybe some pockets of tribals and others exist, but by and large, there is a similarity in the modern, the way the modern development has spread and created similar cultures everywhere. So one way to look at it is look at that whole paradigm as a macro culture, and people will find it easier to look at other things as a non-anthropocentric or ecocentric way of thinking, only if they are able to have at least a microculture where there is a certain comfort level in exploring. And this is something I discovered for myself. Perhaps for so many years I didn't really explore because I didn't have that little microculture. I didn't have a group. And gradually, as that evolved, and maybe more through the Prakriya school, it is, you find more and more stuff unfolding about the connections between nature and. So, how is this different from the normal process work? Uh, in many ways, it's similar. We definitely do owe a huge debt to Pulin, who, whose kind of school of process work, if I can say that, has a huge influence. Um, but here the difference is even in process work of the regular kind, there is a lot of working with the worldview, with perspectives, and so on. But here there is an attempt to question meanings from the man-made world, from the meanings created by human beings, and looking at non-anthropocentric uh, perceptions, perspectives too. Um, so we've added on a whole lot of concepts, framework, processes, etc., which help in reworking one's perceptions. Uh, and finally, yeah, there is human, community, and ecological well-being as a direction. And it's not just exploration, self-exploration, either as an end in itself or to apply towards any other ends. Oh, I didn't know. Huh. So we've been talking about J. Krishnamurti from morning. Every person is mentioned. So, so in a sense, this is also an important consideration that it's not so much to make a person feel good in a present setting wherever they are working, but or wherever they are living, working, doing things, but also to question it, because the sickness outside and sickness inside are very much linked, is the belief. So quickly, I'll go on to what we actually do on the ground. As I said, that's the more fun part, where things evolve, where we work directly, where we work with gnosis. It's not so much just theoretical stuff. So these are the programs we offer. Um, Inner and outer ecology is like the foundational kind of program. Then identities, role systems, there's a lot from the standard process work also there, except that we look at systems also as an ecosystem and what it is to be a leader in an ecosystem rather than leader in a regular man-made system of pyramidal structures. And the deep ecology is a program that we hold in the Sharavati rainforest. We go there every year and spending a lot of time with, being alone in nature, uh, providing that kind of wilderness experience. It's really a drop in the ocean, but it is something. People seem to value it a lot because many people have not spent that kind of time with wilderness. Building eco-wise communities, and the last one, we have not really done more than one program. So there is a kind of a different vision here, which is fostering faith in nature's principles. By and large, people come into the program because they already have faith, but that gets nurtured and supported a lot more. What we can call a prakritik dharma, because today we need it, is the belief. It's not just dharma, but we need a prakritik dharma. And yeah, it's not easy to change. We'll come to that a little later. The role of our subconscious mind, the role of our inner nature in keeping us exactly where we are for centuries, and almost 6 or 7 civilizations have died out because they could not see the writing on the wall, because they could not see the kind of ecological damage they were doing by their living processes. Today we have social media, internet, and a whole lot of things. Possibilities are a little bit more. So there is a whole lot of possibility that people may get into. And already we can see in the last 10 years, the number of people doing the huge number of things, huge number of books being written. There is a shift that's happening in the world. So sadhana is, unless one practices or certain things, a certain part of me won't unfold. In fact, I came across this, that the sadhana word in Sanskrit itself means unfolding. So there is another process word there. Owning up elderhood, because somewhere community has been destroyed, and some people go so far as to say it's been a conspiracy, they've been deliberately destroyed because that's the only way to make consumerists out of everybody. But whatever that may be, the communities having died out means the role of the elder has died down. And it's all been the role of the experts today. So we need elders. It's not rocket science we're talking about, but we need people to own up that role. So for in our internship as facilitators, that's what we don't preach on it or something, but that is a background beckoning. So a whole lot of stuff on holistic science. We talked about Rene Descartes, and a whole lot of what is called reductionist science came about. Reductionist science is basically studying the bits and parts and trying to make sense of the whole, whereas holistic science is looking at the dynamic relationship between the whole and the part. And therefore, you can't study it in an epistemological way. You have to have gnosis to study, to have science of that kind. So, Gaia Theory is a book. I don't know. Anybody read that book? I think in different circles, few people have. Of course, Bhumi people would have, but like basically, James Lovelock made a very path-breaking kind of a work. I mean, statements after so many 20 years of exploration and so on. I think he was a chemist and a biologist and multidisciplinary person. And he talks about the Earth was born 4.5 billion years ago, and about 3.5 billion years ago, life came about. And conditions on Earth to maintain life has continued. There were times there were volcanoes and the oxygen level came down, but some other organisms or bacteria came up to increase the amount of oxygen on Earth, because without a certain amount of oxygen, life will die. So how, in an almost miraculous way, there has been amazing self-regulation on Earth, which is kept, and which is why people call Earth is a total miracle. It's a total shot in the dark, it seems, that we have life on Earth. And scientists say they are not at all very sure in how many planets around the universe life will be there. If it is there, it will still be a rare thing. So that is one thing about Gaia theory. It talks about, the Earth as a living organism, self-regulating, self-organizing, loving life as it were, doing all sorts of things to somehow live, just like a human being would do all sorts of things to somehow live. And the second thing is learning and applying ecological principles. And the third, I've spoken a little bit about complexity theory, emergence and systems thinking. All these kind of understanding of the work done by others gives a better, builds that microculture in which people are able to engage in non-anthropocentric or more ecocentric principles for learning. If you take, the major principles are quite obvious, but we don't really teach our children that. We don't really focus on this in a big way. Accepting and understanding diversity, the constant flow. Life is all about relationships. It's not about objects. But yet in school, we start with A for apple, B for bat, etc., etc. We are not really engaging children in a more process-oriented way. We are giving them objects. Even the lessons in the classes. Even if you learn about a plant, they don't go see a plant, work with the plant, grow a plant. They look at a picture and name it. This is a leaf, this is a stem, this is a flower. So we are literally brainwashed into epistemological or, a different way of thinking. Holistic thinking is sort of ironed out of us. So we have to bring it back. So a whole lot of things can be done for that. And so the four things in blue are more about processes and cyclical flow of resources, which all these things are very significant for the economic system also. The kind of economic system is highly linear today. There is no talk about non-linearity in economics, interconnectedness and interdependence. All of this we also make into a very simple parallel with Panchamahabhutas and even introduce into school. The second is involves the inner ecology. Everything is mixed, but yet just to make it convenient to present, the first three are about outer ecology. This is about the inner ecology. I mean, it's nothing to do with the inner and outer ecology program, which is more primarily self-level work, but just to make it convenient, the power of the subconscious mind, the web of nature and man-made world, how much the man-made world has colonized our minds and the meanings we give, and therefore the feelings that they, create. Right? If the man-made world has made such a big thing about individual achievement and success, for instance, and a whole lot of people would feel this or that about success, not succeeding, the smallness or whatever. Now the whole thing just, it's like pulling the carpet on under your feet off when you realize that the rules of the game in nature are very different, and I am nature after all, you know. And that whole process of relooking at the meanings of the man-made world can completely can be very transformative for a person. The journey of the hero is something we use, and I think Rama Farah talking a bit about it, and how that can be very useful for maybe in a way for a in spite of all this relationship with nature, each one needs to grow. Growth is a very undeniable need of human beings. We just need to learn, we need to grow. Our brains are constructed that way. And therefore, how do you look at what is heroic and what kind of journey? It's adapted from Joseph Campbell's work. And so on. The sources of feelings, a bit of how it changes completely when the man-made meanings, the nature's meanings are what meanings or what principles we understand are layered over the man-made world, the difference it can make. That's the sources of feeling. The processes, the last one is, this set is about holistic inquiry, where there's wholeness and holistic inquiry. But we are calling yoga of community because community will be very important to create that microculture for us to survive, to sustain ourselves with very different views on many things. So yoga, as we know, is uniting. Even in the process of engaging with the community, it can be a very uniting process for oneself and others. Deep ecology was a term that's coined by one Arne Naess. Interestingly, he was a Sanskrit scholar. And and I think if you look back at some of the Vedic Upanishadic statements, whether it is Aham Brahmasmi or Isha Vasyamidam Sarvam or Tattvamasi, if you look at all of them, in a way they can be applied to deep ecology. Deep ecology is about how not ecology outside, but me as being part of ecology. And a lot more work has been done. A lot of beautiful work has been done too to get people in touch with. But we believe that the best thing is nature herself. So we try to take people to wilderness areas with very basic, facilities. And spiritual sutras, as I mentioned, there are many, many in our, in the whole, the Indian culture is a huge phenomena. The Indian culture has, I think I first heard it from Pulin, that India and China are the two civilizations which have continued, sustained themselves over, I don't know, 4, 5, 6,000 years, And that is because to some extent, you see, the principles of nature we talked about are embedded in the entire society. Like for instance, I don't have time, but diversity, if you take. I mean, India had 2,000 plus languages. That's diversity. We have more than 1,000 kinds of handlooms. That's diversity. So many ways diversity was fostered. And that was because we had centralization and non-centralization. So things could grow very differently. And it was not that we were completely ecocentric. But there was a balance on ecocentric and anthropocentric thinking. You know, it was not all going gung ho about the human, achievements and so on. So this, oh, how did this come again? Oh, I'm going back. Sorry. So this is, we can leave it. I'm just talking about process work as one cluster, holistic inquiry, inner ecology. It's the same thing, just all put together. Very shabbily, sorry. So, future directions. I think this kind of work, many people take to very intuitively. There is no need to, like we all used to struggle to communicate what is process work and get participants and so on. Whereas this connect with nature, with or without understanding all this, many people feel the need for it. So they join in more easily. Even in villages, I've seen this. They understand. Like somebody mentioned this thing about India, how anyway, about Indians like contentment or whatever, that kind of stuff. So in many ways, you find we need to take it further, is what we feel. Studying, documenting, sharing Indic roots of ecocentric, just I think it'll be a lovely thing to do more. Some have done some work on this already. The eco-feminine and eco-spiritual aspects of the work, and evolving ways to offer ecocentric process work in a rural community. That's one of the things we are trying to do in a farm in Tiruvannamalai, where we are finding, a lot of interesting things happening, whether it is knowledge about the local plants or whether it is the way people work or fight together. Yeah, whole lot of things are interesting to understand what's happening in the village. I think that's about all. Oh, this is a place where we are working with villagers. So I'll stop here. I might have left certain things out, but that's in the paper to read. Thank you.